Thank you. Hello, everyone. As you've heard, I'm Andrew. I'm a Django core developer. I'm the author of South and sort of a general database wrangler. My life for the last 5 years, since I accidentally wrote South, has basically been just databases. This talk was originally, when I started planning it, a while back, about South. But then, of course, one thing turned to another, and it was about Django DB migrations, moving into Django. And then something else happened, and now it's about Kickstarter, at least to start with. I made a Kickstarter to raise £2,500, that's around $4,000 US, to work on schema migration as part of Django, just to get it finished. I've been doing it for a while, very slowly. I have some time I could have spent on it, so rather than doing freelancing, I said, okay, let's do this. And very fortunately, I raised that money. I raised it in 65 minutes. In fact, I raised £17,952 by the end of the thing. So it's not me you should be clapping, but you'll see in a second. The generosity I received was astounding. The very first day, I think I raised over £8,000 in the very first day. I was sitting there watching that amount tick up, and it is incredible, unlike anything you've ever seen. And when the first £1,000 single donation came in, I was utterly shocked. And as a way of thanking those who donated to the Kickstarter, I would like to address them here all on stage. These are the primary people, so the top 4 companies there each backed me at the £1,000 mark, so I'm very thankful to them. Everyone below them did at least, I believe it's 250 or 100? No, probably 100, I can't remember. I'm terrible like this. But all of them gave also plenty of, I'd like to thank all of them. These people all gave money as well, and in fact, this is every single person who contributed to the Kickstarter. I'd like you to clap every single person for contributing. Thank you all of them. And so I'm sure they'd love to know, what are they paying me for exactly? Well, the question has come around many times in the past few years, why do you want to replace South? What is wrong with it? And there's a few key things wrong with it. First and foremost, there's been 5 years of learning between now and when I released South. So I released South in 2008, just before the very first DjangoCon, in fact, 10 DjangoCons ago. And while it was fine at the time for what it was designed for, it has grown to be problematic in the intervening 5 years. There are issues we could never have foreseen back then, mostly caused by, there are some problems you just don't see for a year and a half until you've got that many migrations that things start dying. I think the most crucial thing that we've had during that period is changing from Subversion to Git. And with that, there's a large amount of VCS merging and branching going on. And South handles that particularly poorly. I'm sure some of you have come across this, the idea that both of you commit migrations on the same app, you merge the branches, and then for one of the people, everything just starts failing. So that's a big issue I need to address. The other problem that I think everyone ever has complained to me about is how big migration files are. You've got this tiny amount of code at the top and this huge amount of code at the bottom, which is for detecting changes. Whenever you do a diff and you've had a migration, you get this giant diff that you just try and ignore the migration change. So trying to fix that is a big priority. And also, after, if you run a project for 3 or 4 years, you end up with a lot of migrations. I've seen ones with over 1,000. I think there's several over 3,000 or 4,000. That's just too many. South was always designed to run through every migration as part of a new install, and that just takes too long these days if you've got that many migrations. So fixing that is also key. So the future, it's new, it's exciting, and there's hopefully less problems. The first thing to do is that South is basically becoming part of Django core. It's becoming 2 parts of Django. The first part is django.db.migrations. That is essentially the thing that runs migrations, as you'll see in a second, and then also a separate schema backend, which is where all the database stuff lives. The things that, it knows how things differ between MySQL and Postgres. It knows how to add columns. So the db.migrations is the thing you as developers will encounter as the new part of South, essentially. It is the bit that provides you with migration commands, it provides you with migration APIs, it does auto-detection, it does all that kind of stuff. It's where the commands come from, it's where the interaction is. And the point is, this is the wrapper that gives you this nice, safe way to do migrations, it has dependency resolution, and all of that lives there. And then the back end is where the SQL generation and the database abstraction lives. The fact that you can't run alter table on SQLite lives in here. On SQLite, altering table is about 5 different commands and a whole load of processing. South and this module both are where that's abstracted away for you. You don't have to care about that. And the idea is that if you want to write your own migration solution, you can just use this and not use the other part. So not only are we trying to sort of have a better solution for everyone, I'm also trying to enable other approaches. Like, there's many valid approaches to migrations, and having a built-in schema editing as part of the back end, I think, is very valuable for that. So, as a brief idea of how this schema editor will look, here's a short code example. So, as you can see here, you have on connection a new function called schema editor. So you call that, you get an instance back of an editor, and then on the editor you start it, you do a few operations. So here we're adding a model and adding a field, and then you call either commit or rollback, and then it applies those changes to the database. And it's a sort of nice, simple API. This is what the migration stuff will use behind the scenes, but if you really want to, for some crazy reason, you can use this too. It's meant to be user-facing in some capacity. In terms of database support, the top 3, Postgres, MySQL, and SQLite, all supported. They are Django's core databases. And Oracle and MS SQL both will be as well, because you guys gave me far too much money. And so I kind of have to now. There are other things where this isn't going to make sense. People ask so things like Mongo and other SQL databases. Those won't be included. But hopefully, well, not in Mongo's case, it's not relational, it makes no sense. But the idea is if you are writing, say, a DB2 backend, you could also implement this layer and do it yourself. So the runner, this is the exciting thing. That's all sort of boring stuff. It's the same code as South, it's rearranged slightly. The big changes are in the actual migration running and parsing itself. So first of all, new migration format. You can now stop complaining at me. This is the old format. I couldn't actually fit a whole migration on my screen to screenshot it, so this is just most of the migration. But as you can see there, the very top part there is the actual migration, and then the rest of that screen is basically redundant frozen ORM. What South does now is it reads the bottom of that file when you're making new migration, compares it to your current models, and then that's how it knows what's changed. This was a good idea at the time, again, as I say. This is a new format. Same zoom, it's a bit small there, let's make it bigger. You can see here it's a lot smaller. And the reason I can do this is because the new format is declarative. It's not just Python code, it is classes in a list. And this means that not only can we run the migration to apply to the database, but we can run it in memory and work out what changes it makes. So in particular, if we have those migration operations, if we have these 3 migrations, we can just go through them in memory and work out what it ends up looking like without having to have a big frozen state at the end. So here you can see I've got, create a model page, create a model author, and then the next migration adds a title to the page, and the next one removes the age from the author. And the new migration solution in memory can do all of these, run through them, and give you at the end what the models look like now. And so, Okay, there we are. Yeah, and so the idea is that, with this way, without having that giant bit of code, you can still work out what the models were at any point in time. You can still compare them, and you can still detect changes. Dependencies. Another problem with South, and one that only emerged a few years in when people had thousands of migrations. So this is where the problem with basically merging Git branches or merging Mercurial branches lives. If you have an app, you make 2 migrations, that's fine, and say you and another developer, you both go away and you both develop a new feature on the same app. She comes back, merges in her migration, you come back, merge in your migration, and then suddenly you've got 2 migrations with the same name. This isn't good. What South does, it goes, a list of migrations. I will take all the names, I will sort them using an ASCII sort order, and then just run them in that order, which is fine until you end up with this kind of clash. So what happens here is it goes 1, 2, and then, well, you've got 2 3s, but that's 3B and that's 3F. So it does 3B and then does 3F. And if you were the person who ran 3F without running 3B, South just whinges at you and blows up. The new approach is having actual support for explicit dependencies. Rather than just assuming the numbers mean something, South will now have in those migration files actual links to what this each migration depends upon. And so the numbers are now entirely meaningless. They're just there for readability and file listings. And what this means is that when you merge two branches, South knows that both of those two migrations you created both depend on the same previous migration. It can detect that. And it can also go through and go, oh, well, these are two different migrations, but they don't touch the same model, and they don't have any foreign keys to each other, so I can automatically merge that, and it can stick in a merge migration. And if it can't do that itself, it will prompt you and go, OK, you've got these, we need to resolve this, and they'll give you a few options of basically accept a solution that it's come up with, or do it yourself, or just quit. So you get a lot more options and a lot more flexibility about how to solve these kind of issues. The other issue is squashing, which has previously been called rebase, but I've changed it because it's confusing being called rebase. The problem here is that, imagine this list is 1,000 migrations long, as it is in some places. That's far too many. If you do your tests or you install a new development machine, you're not going to run through every single one of those migrations. And so instead, what we can do is we can have not only the old migrations, but a brand new migration, which is a replacement for the history. So when you start off, you'll have both the old full set and a brand new one. The brand new one essentially is sort of like if you haven't done any of the other ones yet, you can just jump in here. So if you're shipping, say, a CMS or another sort of third-party library, you can still ship, and old users can upgrade, and new users can install quicker. And then eventually, you can just remove the old ones and be left with a much nicer, smaller migration tree. This isn't quite as simple as it sounds. It can't always be done with one migration. So take, for example, this tree with dependencies. This can't be squashed down to two migrations because there'll be a circular dependency. They'd each depend on each other. So instead, you've got to squash them down like this. Essentially, whenever an app is dependent on by another one, you stop squashing there. And so the idea is that Squash will not only do this, it's architected to be able to do this replacement. So you can go and go, well, you've applied 1 and 2, you haven't applied 3 to 5, but we've got one that replaces them here, so we can just do that. And so basically, it's sort of a self-optimizing way of doing this. So over time, you can remove old migrations and be left with a much smaller, more efficient migration stack. Not only that, if it sees say an add model and then a remove model later, it can just collapse those down to nothing. It knows that operations are the opposite of each other, and it can optimize those away. So when you squash, not only are you optimizing the number of migrations, you're reducing the number of actions as well. So, I've got the Kickstarter money. It finally came through my account roughly last month. Unfortunately, I was away for a week and a bit in between, but I have started work on this in earnest now. I am doing 2 days a week, sometimes 3 on this, full time, and it's going very well. So my first port of call was schema backends. Now, I did most of this work previously, most of it last year. It was mostly ready for merge then. I came back to it, fixed a few incompatibilities, in particular, Americ's new transaction handling in 1.6. And again, it's now mostly ready for merge again. There's a few things missing from it. I'd love to add some proper, better indexing support. I might look into doing some actual support for doing store procedures in a sensible way, rather than just doing execute statements, but we'll see. But that's essentially done. It's ready. The SQLite, MySQL, and Postgres versions, I believe, all work. The other ones need a bit of work still. The migration code itself is what I'm working on primarily at the moment. So there is currently a dependency resolvers in there. There's a start of the new in-state model parser. There's some work on the app cache, so that you make models at runtime. There's a whole load of stuff in there. There's a GitHub link later on where you can see what I've been doing, and you can sort of get an idea of what's involved. What's not happened yet, but you should watch out for, especially as developers using Django, is that the field API is going to change. In particular, fields are going to have to be able to tell a migration solution how to recreate themselves. Basically, if I'm making a migration that involves your field, I need to know how to call your field the way it was called to make you. So if you're a foreign key to a model, I need to be able to say, OK, this field instance turns into this code here, or this representation here. That's not finalized. That needs a lot of working through. But there are going to be changes, and custom fields will need to adapt to them. So look out for that. If you want to see the code I'm using, then you can have a good look at it on my GitHub repository. I have a whole branch here called schema alteration you can look through. It's reasonably readable. I recommend you actually look at the pull requests tied to it, because that has a nice diff view versus master. But there's some comments in there from old code and stuff you can ignore. But there's basically commits should be happening a good number of times a week to a large number of files. If you're interested, please look at it or play around with it. It's probably not stable for a while, but it's pretty usable as these things go. I'm also doing a series of detailed blog posts about problems I find. So in particular, my first blog post now has gone up, which is about problems with the app cache in particular, and also with the start of migration graphing. So if you're interested in reading about sort of the detailed internals of Django and sort of the problems I'm coming across there and how they're being solved, these posts have a good amount of code in them, links to the commits involved, reasoning why it's a problem, and complaints about parts of Django I don't like. So if you're interested, it's worth a read. And finally, if you do have thoughts or feedback or anything you'd like to talk to me about or input on migrations, I really would love to hear it. This is a project that is designed for all of you to use. It's not an internal thing at all. And how you use it and what you want out of it really should affect how it's developed. So if you have any thoughts or feedback, or if you've written one all for me, which is great, please get in touch with me. That's my email, my Twitter's at the end of the slides, all that kind of stuff. I'd really, really love to hear from you about this stuff. So it's quite a blistering run through migrations there, but I hope you have a good idea of what's going on. I'll take any questions as well about what's going on, and then thank you very much.